And in this particular case, I think it's just a reminder to the wider world that China is still making its claim, which it's made, of course, ever since 1949 and the end of the Chinese Civil War in the Cold War, that they still regard Taiwan as a rogue province that broke away and hasn't been incorporated into the mainland.
First, the Trade Minister Greg Hands is on a 2-day trip to Taiwan today as Britain looks to strengthen ties with the island. Now, the visit, of course, carries symbolic weight. China doesn't recognise Taiwan's independence and will see the visit as Britain stating its position as an ally of the island. Let's speak to Rana Mitter, Professor of History and Politics of Modern China at the University of Oxford. Good morning to you.
Morning, Ursula. Hi.
Now, China are not pleased. The Foreign Ministry have said that Britain must stop any form of official exchanges with Taiwan. What does that mean?
Actually, if you look at the statement, it's pretty much a sort of boilerplate reproduction of a fairly standard phrase that is used whenever Western countries have any kind of relationship with Taiwan. It's put out by Zhao Lijian, who is the equivalent of the sort of foreign ministry spokesman. And in this particular case, I think it's just a reminder to the wider world that China is still making its claim, which it's made, of course, ever since 1949 and the end of the Chinese Civil War in the Cold War, that they still regard Taiwan as a rogue province that broke away and hasn't been incorporated into the mainland. But so far, I think it's fair to say that this is a warning. It's not a particular escalation of language in the way that it was when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan a couple of months ago.
Well, absolutely. That was in August, and that led to her visit led to China going forward with military exercises on Taiwanese waters and airspace. With this kind of background, then of a kind of standard boilerplate warning, as you say. What can be achieved? Why is Greg Hands going to Taiwan in terms of trade?
Well, there's actually a development happening probably later this year that's in the background, and that's the likely, although not yet, that's certain entry of the UK into the CPTPP, the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. Put very briefly, it's a major trade gathering that was originally set up by the US. Now Japan is the major country in it, but the UK entering means that it's part of the sort of post-Brexit agenda on trade. And as well as giving the UK a bigger role in Asian trade, one of the things that we now know is that both China and Taiwan would like to get into this organization, but they haven't actually done so yet. So there's a sense in which by going to Taiwan, I think that Greg Hands is indicating that the UK, at least in a general sense, is favourably inclined towards closer trade ties with Taiwan, and that could include the CPTPP, where the UK will have a direct role if it does in fact get in.
And is there anything wider going on, perhaps not this week, but over the next coming months that you can discern? Because Britain doesn't recognise Taiwan's independence, but are we seeing some kind of realignment of powers on the world stage if we look at what's happening in terms of Russia and their friendship with China, and then this idea of kind of resetting, who's on which particular side of the argument. Do you see any movement in that regard?
Yes, I do. I think that two things are being signalled. The first one is that I don't think any major Western country, or actually any Western country, is going to recognise Taiwan independence. That's simply not going to happen, and that goes from the United States, certainly includes the UK. So in a sense, China is sort of, getting at a straw man when it attacks that particular idea. But what is more likely to happen is that big countries in the democratic world, and Japan should be remembered as the closest one geographically to Taiwan, are making it clear that Taiwan's autonomy and its democracy and its capacity to actually make its own decisions on the island, whatever the political setup, remains very important. And I think by sending trade delegations, and of course don't forget it's not just the UK, it is also countries like South Korea, Japan, and indeed Western European countries that have a presence there as well, that they're saying that Taiwan is a cause that's not going to be abandoned. And there's one very practical reason, by the way, on top of the principles of democracy, and that is, of course, the semiconductor chip industry. Taiwan is a huge global dominant power in one area only, and that's semiconductor chips. It's worth remembering that's true in terms of exports to mainland China as well as to the West. So if Taiwan's semiconductor industry was in trouble, everyone, both China and the West, would be in trouble.
I see. Rana, thank you. That is Rana Mitter, Professor of the History and Politics of Modern China at the University of Oxford.